Welcome, dear viewers, to a world where fortunes glittered and secrets simmered beneath the opulent surface of high society. Newport, 1895. A gilded cage for some, a dazzling stage for others. Here, the radiant Charlotte Greer commands every eye, seemingly destined for a brilliant match that promises to elevate her family. But in her shadow, Evelyn, with her quiet sketches and a heart yearning for something more, finds herself caught in the relentless grip of expectation. As the enigmatic Duke of Averton arrives, a single, fleeting glance threatens to unravel generations of carefully constructed plans, pitting immovable duty against a love too forbidden to speak. Will the whispers of ambition drown out the silent, fervent call of the heart, or will one fateful dance ignite a fire no society can extinguish? Tell us, where are you listening from, and what draws you most to the captivating drama of historical romances? The summer sun glowed golden over the rolling lawns of Newport, Rhode Island, painting an opulent scene of wealth and gaiety. The year was 1895. And the Gilded Age was at its grandest. It was a time when fortunes were flaunted, reputations meticulously cultivated, and ambitions quietly sharpened behind hand-painted fans and glittering jewels. On the estate of the Whitmore family, marble fountains trickled softly over sculpted cherubs, and flowered hedges framed the expanse of manicured gardens. Under the sprawling shade of a centuries-old magnolia tree, set apart from the vibrant chatter of guests, sat Evelyn Greer, quiet and composed amidst a sea of brilliance. Her pale blue muslin dress, daintily embroidered with soft floral patterns, skimmed the grass as she delicately balanced her leather-bound sketchbook on her lap. Her gloved hand moved an ivory pencil over the page, capturing the scene before her. The sweeping terrace where high society's finest mingled beneath silk-draped canopies. The quiet rustle of her pencil was soon drowned out by the melody of a string quartet on the veranda. The high-pitched laughter of Charlotte Greer, Evelyn's radiant younger sister, rang clear above the conversation. Charlotte, dressed in the latest fashion, an iridescent gown of lavender silk overlaid with delicate lace, drew eyes to her every movement. Her golden blonde curls seemed to shine brighter under the afternoon sun, and her emerald eyes sparkled as she charmed guests with practiced ease. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile as she gazed at her sister from afar. The contrast between them had long been remarked upon, whispered in corners at parties and over tea sets. Charlotte was the bold, shining flower that stood tall in sunlight, while Evelyn preferred the quiet shadows under which her sketches blossomed unseen. That contrast had long ceased to hurt her, or so she convinced herself. "Remarkable, isn't she?" came a deep, refined voice from nearby. Evelyn lifted her gaze to see her father, Mr. Henry Greer, pausing under the magnolia's canopy. His stern brown eyes were fixed on Charlotte as she spun gracefully in conversation with a group of gentlemen. Charlotte knows her duty. She understands what is expected of her as a member of this family. "She certainly does," Evelyn replied softly, lowering her gaze to her drawing. She shaded the curve of the fountain with practiced precision, hoping her father would not turn his scrutiny upon her. But he did. "You could learn from her, Evelyn." His tone carried the weight of a man who had spent his life building a fortune from nothing. "You cannot spend your time forever buried in books and pencils. This family needs to be elevated. Charlotte is giving us a chance. No thanks to your quiet rebellion. The least you could do is not embarrass us." "I did not think I was," she said, lifting her calm hazel eyes to meet his. But Mr. Greer was already gone, striding toward the terrace to join her mother, who was waving him over with her fan. Evelyn released a sigh, her heart heavy with the familiar pressure of unmet expectations. As she turned her attention back to her sketchbook, the crisp lines on the page slowly blurred. Across the lawn, past lines of bright summer dresses and gentlemen in pale linen suits, she spotted him, the Duke of Averton, Andrew Fairfax. He stood apart from the crowd under the shadow of an ornate pergola, his tall frame dressed impeccably in a charcoal grey suit that seemed to heighten the sharp cut of his jaw. Thick black hair gleamed under the sun, swept neatly away from a face that bore both strength and an air of quiet ennui. His deep blue eyes scanned the crowd with a languid sharpness, as if searching for something or someone to occupy his time, or perhaps his heart. Evelyn quickly returned to her sketch, heat rising in her cheeks at the very thought of his gaze landing on her. She had heard the whispers from every corner that afternoon. The Duke is considering Charlotte. Surely the most enviable match of the season. Charlotte might be a duchess, a duchess. The words hardly stirred Evelyn. Ambition for such heights didn't live in her heart. And yet there was something about the Duke, a quiet tension that told her his interest was far from where everyone assumed it would be. Moments later, Charlotte's laughter sliced through Evelyn's thoughts. Evelyn glanced up to see her sister, practically glowing, making her way toward the Duke, her gown sweeping across the grass in regal waves. Charlotte's head was held high, her painted lips curved in a confident smile as she greeted him with a curtsy. Andrew inclined his head politely and only half smiled in response, his aristocratic detachment evident even in the smallest of gestures. But then his gaze flicked beyond Charlotte and landed on Evelyn. Evelyn's chest tightened as blue eyes met hazel ones briefly, like a thread pulled taut between two people. For a fleeting moment, curiosity and something deeper, unspoken, passed between them. But Charlotte, ever the master of commanding a man's attention, leaned forward to whisper something to Andrew, drawing his eyes back to hers. Evelyn dropped her gaze back to her sketchbook, forcing her pencil to move across the page, though no clear image came to mind anymore. The remainder of the day passed in an unremarkable blur for Evelyn, though the air seemed heavier with expectations she could not yet name. Her mother had been effusive over Charlotte's success at charming the Duke, her father quietly pleased. Evelyn continued to sit in the shadows, feeling the weight of her family's hopes, not for her, of course, but for their gilded star, Charlotte. Later that evening, long after the garden party had dissolved and the final carriage wheels had rolled down the gravel drive, Evelyn walked past her parents' study on her way upstairs. Through the heavy wooden door left ajar, she overheard their conversation. "She must secure him," Mr. Greer declared firmly. "Charlotte is our only hope for legitimacy in Newport, Henry," Evelyn's mother added sharply. "What choice do we have with Evelyn still playing with her pencils? She'll never find a husband of consequence." Evelyn froze in silence as their words pierced through the airs of refined gentility that adorned their family so carefully during the day. She fled for her room before she could hear more, her chest tight with both shame and defiance. Why was it that Charlotte's brilliance had to mean Evelyn's inadequacy? Could they not both exist, as they were, differently, yet equally? By the time she pressed her cheek against the cool pillowcase that night, the sting of her parents' words had dulled. But a question lingered in her mind, quiet but insistent. Had she imagined that flicker of curiosity in Andrew Fairfax's gaze? The following morning brought news. The Duke of Averton would be attending an upcoming ball at the Breakers. Charlotte, triumphant and giddy, began describing the custom gown she would have made, bold, dazzling, undeniably unforgettable. Evelyn tucked her sketchbook under her arm, resigned to another night in the shadows. Surely, whatever had passed between her and the Duke in that single fleeting glance was meaningless. Surely, nothing could come of it, or so she thought. The Breakers, Newport's most extravagant summer mansion, shone like a beacon on a warm evening in late June. Its grand marble facade, illuminated by hundreds of gas lamps and flickering candlelight from within, stood proudly against the deep violet hues of the darkening sky. Inside, the halls buzzed with life as Newport's elite swirled in a magnificent display of wealth and influence. Women in shimmering silks and men in sharply tailored suits moved through the gilded rooms like constellations of ceaseless radiance. The music of a 9-piece orchestra spilled from the ballroom, a lively waltz that seemed to quicken the pulse of everyone present. Crystal chandeliers glimmered above as couples in perfectly synchronized steps filled the marble floors. For most, this was an evening of triumph, gossip, and flirtation, a night to solidify alliances or make whispered promises behind folding fans. Into this world of opulence entered Charlotte Greer, resplendent in her ruby-red gown that seemed to catch and reflect the light with every turn. Her corseted silhouette was wrapped in yards of silk that clung to her waist and cascaded like molten fire to the floor. A daring touch of glitter adorned her décolletage, and her golden curls were gathered beneath a delicate tiara of diamonds. Every detail of her appearance had been meticulously planned, every step designed to demand attention. And it worked. Heads turned as she descended the sweeping staircase into the ballroom. "Mama, look at her," sighed one dowager seated near the champagne fountain. "Charlotte Greer is the very picture of a duchess. Poor Evelyn will never stand a chance." But Evelyn was far from the commotion of admiring glances and heated whispers. She had arrived late, as was her preference, slipping through the side doors without fanfare. While Charlotte commanded the stage, Evelyn sought refuge by the arched terrace doors leading to the gardens. Her dress, a gentle pale blue silk overlaid with delicate floral embroidery, reflected none of the dramatic grandeur of her sister's ensemble. It fit her like a quiet whisper, designed to blend in rather than dazzle, though it carried an understated grace that few noticed. Under her shawl, she clutched her ever-present sketchbook tightly, hoping the noise and splendor of the evening would allow her to disappear into the shadows. The ballroom, with its sea of twirling skirts and echoes of polite laughter, overwhelmed her senses. The air was thick with the mingling perfumes of lilac, jasmine, and rosewater, each guest competing for dominance even in scent. "Evelyn!" called her mother in a sharp whisper, fanning herself furiously as she spied her eldest daughter inching toward the terrace. "Where are you going? For heaven's sake, at least greet someone before you vanish." But Evelyn had perfected the art of evasion over the years. She slipped through the glass-panelled doors before her absence could invite more parental scorn. Out in the gardens, the evening air was crisp and carried the soothing scent of salt from the nearby Atlantic. The music grew faint, replaced by the rustling of the hydrangeas and the rhythmic chirping of summer crickets. She found a quiet bench beneath an ivy-twined trellis and opened her sketchbook. A nearby lantern on a wrought-iron post cast enough light to illuminate the page. Slowly, as her pencil glided across the smooth parchment, the noise inside faded into irrelevance. She drew the cascading arches of the terrace, the flicker of candlelights from the windows, barely reaching the darkened edges of the lush garden. "Do you always hide from such grand occasions?" Evelyn started at the voice, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. She turned quickly and found herself staring into the deep blue gaze of Andrew Fairfax, the Duke of Averton. He stood just beyond the glow of the lantern, his broad frame somehow both imposing and approachable against the dark backdrop of the night. He had removed his top hat, holding it loosely in one hand as the moon lit the sharp lines of his face. His perfectly tailored evening attire, a charcoal grey tailcoat and snow-white cravat, looked strikingly effortless, as though he had stepped straight from one of her sketches of a gallant prince. I didn't mean to hide," Evelyn stammered, snapping her sketchbook shut as if caught in an act of rebellion. Heat rose to her cheeks, though she could not be sure whether it was from surprise or his piercing gaze. Andrew stepped closer, his polished shoes silent against the garden path. "It seems to me," he said, his voice low and smooth, "that you find peace where others find spectacle. That is not a flaw, Miss Greer. It is refreshing." She blinked at him, unsure whether he was mocking or sincere. When she remained silent, he placed his hat on the bench beside her and gestured to the sketchbook. "Might I see what has stolen you away from the ball?" "My lord, it's nothing worthy of showing," she replied softly, though she could not entirely conceal the slight tremor in her voice. "Let me be the judge of that," he countered, with a half-smile that held far too much charm for her comfort. Reluctantly, Evelyn offered him the open sketchbook. As his hand brushed hers briefly in the transfer, a spark of tension rippled through her, something unspoken yet undeniable. Andrew surveyed the page intently, his brow furrowing in thought. "This is extraordinary," he said after a moment, glancing at her. His voice had softened, stripped of the polished detachment he carried in public. "You see everything. The light, the edges, the parts that others overlook." "It is just a hobby," Evelyn murmured, lowering her gaze. "Why speak of it so humbly? There is no shame in creating something beautiful, even if only for yourself." She lifted her eyes to meet his, startled by the weight of his words. For so long, Evelyn's quiet pursuits had been dismissed as trivial, a distraction from what truly mattered to her family. But here in the garden, under the glow of the lantern and the intensity of the Duke's gaze, her effort seemed to hold value for the first time. The moment stretched between them, quiet and unbroken by the noises of the distant party. And yet, it was not silence. It was the charged stillness of two people standing on the precipice of something unknown. Andrew finally spoke, his voice low. "Miss Greer, may I confess something to you, though we are little more than strangers?" She hesitated. "I suppose I envy you," he said simply. "Envy me," she repeated, incredulous. "But what could I possibly have that someone like you, a duke, would want?" "Freedom," he answered without pause. "You create because you wish to. You are not bound by duty, by endless expectations, and the constant effort to meet them. Or if you are, you carry it with more grace than I could ever hope to." Evelyn's breath caught. She shook her head, a rueful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "If only that were true. I, too, live a life constrained. My family's expectations may not bear a title, but they weigh just as heavily on me. Perhaps we are not so different, you and I." Andrew regarded her carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finally extended a hand to her, the movement was both daring and unexpected. "Walk back with me. I would not mind escaping the noise a little longer in your company." She hesitated, her heart fluttering in her chest. And yet, she could not deny the pull she felt toward this man who spoke of freedom and constraint in the same breath, as though he alone understood the complexities of her existence. Slowly, she placed her hand in his and stood. They returned to the ballroom not as two people seeking attention, but as two figures cloaked in unspoken understanding. At the threshold, Andrew leaned toward her and murmured, under the cover of the orchestra's crescendo, "Do not wander away again without granting me a dance. It would be a tragedy to leave this night without knowing how you waltz." Her cheeks flushed as he disappeared into the crowd, drawn away by the demands of his station. And Evelyn, for the first time, wondered whether the shadows she had hidden in for so long had finally begun to pull her into something impossibly bright. Morning sunlight spilled over the manicured lawns of Newport, casting a golden glow on the towering mansions that lined its coast. Yet, even beneath such beauty, the air seemed to hum with whispers, as if the trees and hedges themselves carried the weight of unspoken intrigue. The fallout from the ball at the Breakers had begun its steady ripple through society, and no one was more aware of it than Evelyn Greer. For once, Evelyn was not shielded by her usual quiet anonymity. In the days following the ball, everywhere she went, she felt the weight of curious eyes and heard the faint echoes of whispered speculation. The Duke of Averton had danced with her, not Charlotte, the family's shining star, but Evelyn, the quiet daughter who had spent her life in the shadows. Such an occurrence was beyond scandalous. It was baffling. Gossip fluttered like secret letters exchanged in corners. Had the Duke's attention truly wandered to the elder Miss Greer? What could he possibly have seen in her? Though no names were spoken aloud in Evelyn's presence, she could see the implications in the pitying smiles of the ladies and the teasing smirks of the gentlemen. Charlotte's laughter, louder and more clipped than usual, rose sharply over the murmur of society. She cared little for subtlety during these moments, and her voice often carried to those who weren't meant to hear it. "Poor Evelyn," Charlotte sighed dramatically from the sunlit veranda of their home as their mother prepared the guest list for their luncheon. "She's so soft-spoken and awkward at gatherings. Truly, I hope society doesn't assume she sought the Duke's attention deliberately. If he smiled at her, she must have misread it. It would be so easy for someone like her to mistake courtesy for interest." Seated nearby, Evelyn stilled at her sister's casually cruel remarks, but said nothing. She continued to sketch an unfinished vine curling along the frame of a window, though her hands trembled slightly as the lead brushed the page. Standing behind her, Mrs. Greer frowned at the incomplete drawing. "You've grown distracted, Evelyn," her mother said curtly. "Should I remind you that this family relies on Charlotte's grace to elevate all of us? The slightest misstep by anyone, especially you, could threaten everything we hope to achieve. Do not embarrass your sister by giving people reason to believe these absurd rumors." Evelyn swallowed hard, a knot forming deep inside her chest. The weight of her family's expectations pressed down with a suffocating force, but she managed to nod. "Yes, Mamma," she murmured, though she did not meet her mother's eyes. When the luncheon arrived that afternoon, Evelyn kept her distance. The Greers' dining room was resplendent with ivory china, golden candelabras, and bouquets of freshly clipped flowers. Through the windows, the sea glittered like liquid silver, a perfect backdrop for Lady Agatha Littleton, Andrew's sharp-tongued aunt, and one of Newport's most formidable matrons. She sat at the head of the table, surveying the scene with eagle eyes. Charlotte took her place effortlessly as the star, keeping the table entertained with charming anecdotes and honeyed compliments. Evelyn knew her role was to remain silent, to melt into the background and silently shepherd Charlotte's glow, but her position became tenuous the moment the Duke arrived. Andrew's presence, as always, commanded attention. Women straightened their posture, men adjusted their cravats, and even Lady Agatha allowed herself a warm smile as he entered. But Evelyn avoided his gaze, staring intently at the lace edge of her gloves. Or rather, she tried to avoid it. From across the room, Evelyn could feel Andrew's eyes on her as keenly as the summer sun burning through the glass windows. His attention was measured and discreet, nothing inappropriate, but enough to set her pulse racing. She dared a glance up, and there it was again, that indescribable spark that passed between them, lightning in a still sky. It was Lady Agatha who broke the tension. Sharp as ever, the elderly woman swept her gaze over Evelyn and her sister before addressing the Duke. "Andrew, have you met both of the Greer sisters? I dare say Charlotte is the lively rose of the family," she said with a knowing little smirk as the others chuckled politely. "But Evelyn here, with her sketchbook always in hand, must have the eye of an artist. It's no wonder I see you glancing her way, my dear nephew. You have always had a taste for beauty in quieter forms." Charlotte stiffened immediately, the smile freezing on her lips. "Oh, Aunt Agatha," she said, her tone laced with forced laughter. "You're far too generous toward Evelyn. She prefers the company of her drawings to people, I'm afraid. The Duke's interest lies in livelier pursuits, I'm sure." Andrew raised a brow, his voice calm but firm. "I'd argue, Lady Charlotte, that depth can be far more captivating than superficial brightness." The comment hung in the air like a thundercloud, silencing the table. Charlotte blinked, visibly caught off guard, while Lady Agatha's shrewd eyes narrowed in amusement. Evelyn, for her part, focused on breathing evenly, though her cheeks burned. The rest of the luncheon continued on uneasily, the usual frivolities strained by the palpable tension between the sisters. When the meal concluded, the guests wandered into different rooms to enjoy their tea. Evelyn, sensing her mother's eyes watching her every move, slipped away to the parlour. She reached for a sketch left on the side table, hoping to regain her composure. But before she could begin, a soft voice called her name. "Miss Greer." She turned slowly and saw Andrew standing near the doorway, his expression unreadable. He stepped inside, careful to close the door behind him while keeping a respectable distance. He held something in his hand, her sketchbook, closed and bound by its worn leather cover. Her heart nearly stopped. "You left this behind," he said. "I thought you might miss it." Evelyn hesitated, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she accepted it from him. As their fingers brushed, a spark of something unspoken passed between them again, tangible and fleeting. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said softly, clutching the book against her chest. Andrew lingered for a moment longer, glancing toward the door to ensure their privacy. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Miss Greer, I wish I could speak freely, but I am afraid my words may only add to your burdens." Evelyn's brows furrowed, her pulse quickening. "Why do you feel burdened, Your Grace?" "For the same reason you do, I suppose. Expectations." His eyes searched hers, dark and sincere. "Everyone assumes I exist only to fulfill certain duties, play a particular role. But I have never hungered for titles, wealth, or the life they require. I long for something true." His words pierced through the defenses she had carefully built over the years, striking at the very heart of her loneliness. She wanted to respond, to tell him she understood in a way no one else could, but fear held her tongue. She couldn't dare to dream of what his words implied, not when the consequences could ripple far beyond herself. Instead, she replied quietly, "You honor me with your confidence, Your Grace, but I fear I may not be the balm you seek." For a moment, Andrew said nothing. Then, with quiet resolve, he slipped something into the pages of her sketchbook. "Take your time, Miss Greer," he said softly. "Some truths are meant only for those who can see them." Before she could respond, he strode out of the room, leaving Evelyn clutching the small book as if her life depended on it. Her breath caught as she opened it to find a folded piece of fine parchment. She hesitated to open it. What secrets could it hold? But before she could steal a moment for discovery, her mother called sharply from the hallway, demanding her presence. Evelyn quickly hid the note inside the folds of her shawl, her heart racing with suspicion, hope, and fear all at once. As she walked toward her family, she could feel Charlotte's glare from across the room, sharp and piercing. Evelyn knew her sister felt the shift, the unraveling of the control she had so carefully maintained over the Duke's attentions. Charlotte's bright smile returned as she greeted a guest with laughter. But Evelyn caught the glint of steel in her sister's eyes. The game had only just begun, but already the stakes felt impossibly high. The grand ballroom of the Vanderbilt estate shimmered with unrelenting opulence that evening. Hundreds of lights sparkled from crystal chandeliers above, as dozens of golden candelabras flickered against pristine white walls, adorned with gold leaf moldings. It was a room designed not merely to impress, but to overwhelm, a cathedral of wealth and excess, where the whispers of scandal were as treasured as the diamonds on the women's necks. The hum of polite conversation mingled with the swell of strings, the violins and cellos filling the space with a waltz so delicate it seemed to float like the faintest breeze over the crowd. Outside, the gardens basked under the pale glow of the moon. But it was within this gilded room that rivalries took root, alliances were forged, and fortunes were secured. Charlotte Greer had never looked more radiant. It was as if every candle had been lit for her. The very flames seemed to flicker in homage to her beauty. Her gown, a daring creation of deep emerald satin with a neckline that bordered on audacious, drew eyes to her wherever she moved. The diamonds at her throat caught the light with every turn of her head, sparkling like the stars themselves against her golden skin. Her laugh, high and melodic, was carefully measured, a sound designed to charm even the hardest of hearts. Evelyn, as expected, lingered on the edges of the room. She wore a gown of pale champagne tulle, understated but elegant, the kind of dress designed to fade into the background. She stood beneath a garland of ivory roses near the far corner, her hands clasped tightly before her. The whispers around her had grown louder since the breakers, a faint but persistent buzz of rumor and supposition. What had compelled the Duke of Averton to single her out? Could the quiet elder Greer sister truly have captured his attention? Across the room, Andrew Fairfax was a storm cloaked in stillness. His presence, effortlessly commanding, drew attention even as he stood alone. His charcoal black tailcoat and pristine white cravat were impeccably tailored, but it wasn't the faultless tailoring that made him stand out. It was the tension simmering beneath the surface, the unmistakable weight of someone being pulled in two opposite directions. Tonight, his presence rippled through the air of the room, like an unspoken promise of chaos, as though even he could sense what was to come. Charlotte had been watching Evelyn carefully all evening. In her mind, it was inconceivable that the Duke's attention could have shifted so dramatically. She had spent years sculpting her perfection, building her place in society with relentless charm and calculated brilliance. Evelyn was no threat. She had no polish, no fire. And yet, there he was, his eyes drifting toward the far corner of the room, where Evelyn lingered, as if the rest of the evening were unworthy of his presence. Charlotte's smile tightened. If Andrew's gaze returned to Evelyn one more time, society would talk, and Charlotte would allow no rumor to fester without her direct intervention. The moment came during the second waltz of the evening. Andrew's restraint snapped ever so slightly, as his eyes once again sought Evelyn's through the crowd. It was an unguarded look, and though it lasted less than a heartbeat, it was enough. Enough to confirm what Charlotte had feared and what Evelyn had tried so desperately to ignore. Charlotte's moment to strike was upon her. She excused herself from a circle of admirers with graceful precision and quietly approached Evelyn, her steps measured and deliberate. "Sister," she said, her voice sweet and dripping with false concern, "why do you linger here in shadows while others enjoy the splendor of one of Newport's finest balls? Surely you must wish to participate in the merriment. Or perhaps—" Charlotte paused, her lips curving in a smile barely veiling its malice. "Perhaps you are waiting for him to find you." Evelyn turned to her, her chest tightening. "I don't know what you mean," she said softly, though the flush rising to her cheeks betrayed her emotions. Charlotte's voice dropped, pitched low enough to feign intimacy, but loud enough to reach the ears of those nearest. "Oh, Evelyn, you needn't hide it. The Duke is a kind man, after all. It's only natural that you might misread his intention. Men of his stature are often generous in their demeanor, but it would be so easy, so very painful, for that generosity to be mistaken for something deeper." Her green eyes gleamed as they latched onto Evelyn's widening gaze. "Charlotte," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling as she realized the snare tightening. "Please don't—" "Oh, Evelyn, I only wish to protect you," Charlotte continued, her tone sliding smoothly into one of mock sympathy. "You must know how delicate a woman's reputation can be. One false step, a look, a rumor, and everything she has is gone. You wouldn't want that, would you?" The few guests within earshot began to exchange glances. The spark had been lit. Evelyn's heart raced. Her hands gripped the folds of her gown in desperation, the soft tulle crumpling beneath her fingers. She felt trapped, caged by her sister's cruelty and the unrelenting eyes of all those watching. She turned without a word and fled, her hurried steps echoing faintly across the floor as she headed toward the shadowy arches near the ballroom's edge. Andrew, witnessing the exchange from across the room, excused himself abruptly from his conversation with an elderly countess. He followed without hesitation, his long strides carrying him quickly after Evelyn. He found her on the terrace under a canopy of midnight sky, her back to him as she gripped the balustrade. Her breathing was uneven, her shoulders taut, every inch of her body radiating tension and pain. "Evelyn!" His voice was firm yet soft, filled with quiet authority, but carrying a gentleness that pulled her from her turmoil. She turned to him, her hazel eyes shimmering in the moonlight, her lips trembling with unspoken words. "You shouldn't," she began. "I should." His interruption was resolute. "Evelyn, you mustn't let this consume you. I will not stand by while they wound you with their words. Do you not see?" she whispered fiercely, her voice breaking. "It is not their words alone. It is—" Everything, my family, my sister, all I do is in their shadow, and now I have brought their fury upon myself. For what? For nothing but a look, a moment that I cannot stop reliving, but that cannot mean anything more." Andrew stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, urgent tone. "You are wrong about one thing, Evelyn. It does mean more. It means everything." Her breath hitched as she stared at him, her gaze locked on the sincerity etched across his features. Before she could respond, a voice shattered their moment. "Your Grace!" Charlotte swept onto the terrace with practiced elegance, her emerald gown gliding behind her like a serpent's tail. Her smile was brittle, her tone edged with sharpness beneath its sugary facade. "I've been looking for you everywhere. The guests are wondering why our host has abandoned the festivities." Andrew turned to her, standing tall, his expression steady and unyielding. "Charlotte," he said evenly, "surely you understand how it appears." Charlotte continued, her voice growing louder for the benefit of the small crowd that had trickled onto the terrace. "You and my sister, out here alone, together. Rumors are such slippery things after all. You wouldn't want to damage her reputation, or mine, would you, Your Grace?" Andrew took a step forward, his eyes piercing straight through her polished front. His voice carried, strong and decisive. "I have no wish to lead anyone to misunderstand my intentions, Lady Charlotte. Let there be no mistake, my heart does not lie with you." At that, the gathered crowd gasped audibly, the whispers erupting almost instantly. Charlotte's face paled, the colour draining from her cheeks as she froze, the full weight of his words sinking in. Andrew turned back to Evelyn, who stood aghast, as shocked as the rest. "And to you, Evelyn," he said, his tone softening but losing none of its intensity. "Every moment we have shared, every fleeting glance, every word, it has meant more to me than 1,000 empty titles. If you allow it, I would give up everything, everything, to build a life with you." Evelyn's lips parted in disbelief, but her words refused to come. Her heart thundered in her chest, so loud she feared it might echo into the night. The Duke of Averton, a man born to hold the world in his hands, stood before her, offering it all. But in that moment, all Evelyn could feel was the suffocating weight of what it would cost them both. Without a word, she turned and fled into the shadows, leaving Andrew standing alone beneath the pale moonlight, and Charlotte, burning silently with fury. The morning after the ball broke over Newport, not with the usual gentle lull of the ocean breeze, but with a harsh, unforgiving glare. The air, typically redolent with the scent of salt and honeysuckle, now seemed to crackle with an unseen tension, a palpable sense of scandal hanging heavy over every mansion, every neatly trimmed hedge, every polished carriage on the gravel drives. Andrew Fairfax, the Duke of Averton, awoke in a state of grim resolve, the opulence of his borrowed rooms at the Whitmore estate feeling more like a gilded cage than ever before. His mind, usually a fortress of aristocratic composure, was a tempest of conflicting emotions. The profound hurt of Evelyn's retreat, the bitter taste of Charlotte's public humiliation, and the iron will that had hardened overnight. He stood by the window, a figure of solitary defiance, his gaze fixed not on the picturesque harbour, but on some distant internal horizon. The decision had been made in the darkest hours of the night, forged in the crucible of Evelyn's terrified refusal and Charlotte's venomous triumph. He would not, could not, continue to play the part society demanded. His heart, once a quiet, guarded chamber, had been irrevocably claimed, and to deny the truth now would be to betray the very essence of himself. Later that morning, the news spread like wildfire, carried by agitated footmen and breathless maids, then amplified by the morning's frantic calls between hostesses. Andrew, Duke of Averton, a man whose lineage was as ancient as England itself, had issued a formal statement. He would be abdicating his title, severing his ties to the expectations and responsibilities of his dukedom, effective immediately upon his departure for Italy. Newport society was plunged into a state of shocked disbelief, then outright condemnation. Whispers turned to outraged pronouncements. A duke, renouncing his birthright for nothing? For a fleeting connection with the quiet Miss Greer? It was an unprecedented act of rebellion, a brazen slap in the face to the established order. How could a man of such standing so casually discard centuries of tradition, merely because his heart had been, or so it was rumored, momentarily swayed? He was not merely abandoning his responsibilities, he was abandoning them, the very society that had welcomed him with open arms and offered its most prized daughters. Condemnation rained down upon him, painting him as impulsive, reckless, and deeply ungrateful. Meanwhile, back at the Greer mansion, Evelyn found herself caught in a whirlwind of parental fury that dwarfed any past reproaches. Her parents' study, usually a bastion of quiet contemplation for her father, now felt like a courtroom where she was the accused. Mr. Henry Greer, his face flushed with a terrifying blend of rage and despair, paced the expensive Persian rug. "What have you done, Evelyn? What have you done?" he roared, his voice trembling with an emotion she had rarely witnessed in him. "Our name, our standing, you have dragged it through the mud, disgraced us in front of all Newport." Mrs. Greer, usually the picture of composure, sat rigid on the edge of a velvet armchair, her hand pressed to her temple as if to stave off a pounding headache. Her eyes, usually cool and discerning, now burned with a desperate anger. To reject a duke, Evelyn, a duke, do you understand the doors that would have opened for this family? Charlotte, our beautiful, dutiful Charlotte, offered everything, and you stood by and allowed this scandal to befall us. Evelyn stood before them, a small, pale figure against the backdrop of their colossal wrath. Her heart throbbed, a wounded bird beating against the bars of its cage. She longed to explain, to defend, to cry out that she had rejected Andrew precisely to protect them, to preserve their fragile standing. But the words caught in her throat, choked by the sheer weight of their disappointment and the gnawing fear that she had indeed ruined everything. "You will write a letter, Evelyn," Mr. Greer declared, stopping his pacing to fix her with a stare that promised dire consequences. "A letter to the Duke, publicly denouncing any romantic connection, stating unequivocally that you wish for no further communication. You will clarify that your family holds him in the highest esteem, but that any perceived affections were entirely a misunderstanding on his part." Evelyn recoiled as if struck. "Papa, I cannot," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You will," Mrs. Greer interjected, her voice laced with a cold, cutting edge. "And if you refuse, if you continue this quiet rebellion, as your father calls it, then you leave us no choice. Your Aunt Helen, in Boston, has often spoken of needing a companion. A change of scenery, far from Newport's influence, would do you good, Evelyn. Perhaps she can teach you discretion and how to properly conduct yourself in society." The threat of exile hung in the air, a chilling prospect of banishment from everything she knew, even the quiet comforts of her home. It was the ultimate abandonment, a sentence for daring to possess a heart that beat to a different rhythm. Her art, her sketches, her very essence would be stifled in the suffocating silence of an aunt's distant household. The thought was a physical blow. She felt utterly alone, trapped between the man who offered her a grand, terrifying love and the family demanding she deny its very existence. Unseen by her parents, Charlotte, lurking just beyond the study door, absorbed every word. A cruel smile slowly spread across her lips. Andrew had humiliated her, but she would have her revenge, and Evelyn would pay the highest price. Her mind, usually occupied with gowns and social triumphs, now worked with a calculating precision Evelyn could never have imagined. Later that same day, as Evelyn remained sequestered in her room, struggling to compose a letter that felt like a betrayal of her very soul, Charlotte executed her final, devastating blow. She retreated to her writing desk, her emerald eyes glinting with a cold, triumphant fire. With meticulous care, she selected a sheet of Evelyn's personal stationery, the delicate paper with a faint, almost invisible watermark known only to the family. She practiced Evelyn's elegant hand, mimicking her graceful loops and soft curves until the script was indistinguishable from her sister's own. The letter she penned was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It spoke of regret, of a silly, girlish infatuation that had been misinterpreted, of the overwhelming pressure from her family and of her duty to them. It explained, with a heart-wrenching finality, that she had indeed chosen her family, her reputation, and the life laid out for her. It thanked Andrew for his kindness, but firmly, unequivocally, released him from any perceived obligation or affection. It shattered any lingering hope Andrew might harbour, convincing him that Evelyn had, in the end, chosen the predictable path, leaving him alone in his defiant stand. Charlotte sealed the envelope with a flourish, pressed a servant into its immediate delivery, and then settled back, a satisfied if cold smirk playing on her lips. The letter reached Andrew Fairfax just as he was overseeing the final preparations for his departure. He stood on the bustling docks of Newport, the crisp scent of the Atlantic filling his lungs, the majestic ship awaiting him, a vessel of escape and an unknown future. His belongings were already stowed, his small retinue of loyal servants discreetly at his side. He had done it. He had cast off the chains of his birthright, a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Yet a crushing weight pressed down on him, the absence of Evelyn. He had held onto a fragile thread of hope, a desperate prayer that she would appear, that she would understand the immensity of his sacrifice, that she would join him. When the letter, bearing Evelyn's familiar, elegant script, was handed to him, his heart leaped with a desperate, hopeful tremor, but as his eyes scanned the carefully chosen words, his world crumbled around him. Each sentence was a dagger, twisting deeper into the wound of his already aching heart. A silly, girlish infatuation, misinterpreted, chosen her family, released him. The words, cold and clinical, echoed her refusal on the terrace, but this time they carried the weight of finality. He had given up everything for a love that, as the letter so cruelly stated, was never truly meant to be. He had dared to defy convention, to seek authenticity, and in return he had lost his title, his home, and now the woman who had stirred his soul. A profound, crushing heartbreak settled upon him, leaving him feeling hollowed out, adrift. He boarded the ship, a man utterly alone, convinced that Evelyn had indeed chosen her family, her duty, her comfortable life in the shadows. Over the terrifying, exhilarating freedom he had offered, the ship's horn sounded, a mournful cry across the water. As he set sail for Europe, his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, believing Evelyn had delivered the final, most painful blow. Evelyn, meanwhile, spent the following day in a haze of despair, preparing herself for exile to Boston. The very thought of leaving Newport, of being separated from everything she cherished, filled her with a profound sorrow. She clung to her sketchbook, the only true solace she had ever known, trying to find a corner of peace within its pages. The world felt muted, her vibrant emotions dulled by resignation. It was later that afternoon when Lady Agatha Littleton arrived at the Greer mansion, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had noted Charlotte's almost unnatural triumph, a certain glint in her niece's emerald gaze that spoke less of relief and more of cold satisfaction. Coupled with Andrew's devastated departure, a seed of suspicion had taken root in Lady Agatha's shrewd mind. She requested to see Evelyn, her tone firm, allowing for no refusal. In Evelyn's sun-drenched parlour, Lady Agatha, her expression uncharacteristically gentle, asked Evelyn about Andrew's departure. Evelyn, tears brimming, confessed her despair, her sense of powerlessness, and her conviction that Andrew had left believing she had rejected him. Lady Agatha listened intently, her gaze piercing. "You did not send him a letter, did you, child?" Lady Agatha asked, her voice quiet but insistent. Evelyn shook her head, confusion warring with her grief. "No, Lady Agatha. My parents insisted I write one, but I could not bring myself to do it, not in the way they demanded. Lady Agatha's eyes narrowed, a sudden fury flickering within them. I thought as much. A letter reached Andrew, one penned in your hand, yet carrying Charlotte's bitter essence. She then explained with grim precision how she had discovered Charlotte's discarded drafts among the papers left scattered in the study, a telltale detail of a particular brand of stationery matching Evelyn's own. The words written in those drafts echoed the very sentiments that had been delivered to Andrew. The revelation struck Evelyn like a bolt of lightning. The shock was instantaneous, then a white-hot anger, a righteous indignation she had never known. Charlotte, her own sister. The betrayal was deeper, more insidious than anything she could have imagined. Her despair evaporated, replaced by a fierce, burning determination. Andrew. He believed her. He believed she had cast him aside. He was leaving, heartbroken, because of Charlotte's cruel deception. There was no time for sorrow, no room for hesitation. Andrew was on his way to Italy, believing himself abandoned. Evelyn's heart, once so conflicted, now beat with a singular, urgent purpose. She would not let him go. She would not allow Charlotte's poisonous lies to sever the connection she knew, deep in her soul, was true. Throwing caution, reputation, and her family's wrath to the winds, Evelyn rushed to the port. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues, but her gaze was fixed on the vast, shimmering expanse of the ocean. Her parents' threats, society's condemnation, all of it faded into insignificance. There was only Andrew and the desperate burning need to reach him. With a newfound courage she never knew she possessed, she booked passage on the next available ship, determined to fight for the love she had convinced herself she could never deserve. Her future was uncertain, her path perilous, but for the first time in her life Evelyn Greer was truly free, embarking on a journey not of exile, but of audacious, undeniable love. Weeks later, the salty air of the Atlantic was a distant memory for Evelyn, replaced by the warm, earthy fragrance of Tuscan vineyards under a generous Italian sun. Her journey across the vast ocean had been a blur of nervous anticipation and resolute determination, each wave beneath the ship carrying her further from a life of gilded cages and closer to a destiny she was, for the first time, actively forging. The carriage ride through the winding, cypress-lined roads of the Italian countryside had felt like a dream, the landscape a living canvas of olive groves and ancient stone, vastly different from the manicured lawns of Newport. Her heart, a tumultuous sea of hope and fear, pounded rhythmically against her ribs as the driver announced their arrival at a secluded villa nestled amongst the rolling hills. It was not a grand, ostentatious palace like those Andrew was accustomed to, but a modest, sun-kissed stone dwelling, its terracotta roof tiles glowing with centuries of absorbed warmth. Ivy climbed its ancient walls, and vibrant bougainvillea cascaded from window boxes. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of cicadas and the gentle whisper of the breeze through the cypress trees. As she stepped down from the carriage, her legs still unsteady from the journey, a sound drifted from an open archway leading to a shaded courtyard, the rhythmic tap and scrape of a chisel against stone. It was a sound both unfamiliar and deeply compelling. With hesitant steps, Evelyn approached, her heart now a frantic drum against her ribs. Through the archway, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the courtyard, she saw him. Andrew. He stood before a large, rough block of marble, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, sinewy forearms dusted with fine white powder. His brow was furrowed in intense concentration, his thick black hair falling artfully across his forehead, a lock escaping the meticulous style he always maintained in society. He held a chisel and hammer with practiced ease, his movements precise and deliberate as he coaxed a form from the unyielding stone. It was a sight that stole her breath, a revelation of a hidden man, one whose hands were accustomed not to governing, but to creating. The statue he was shaping was a figure of a woman, her form still emerging from the marble, but already imbued with a sense of quiet strength and contemplative grace. Her features were not yet defined, but Evelyn saw a familiar spirit in the emerging lines, a reflection of a soul that valued solitude and inner beauty. It struck her then, with the force of a tidal wave, that this was the art he had spoken of, the freedom he had longed for, the passion he had abandoned in his youth to meet the demands of his title. He had found it again, here, in this quiet corner of the world. She stood for a long moment, simply watching him, a profound sense of awe and tender love washing over her. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of miles and unspoken words. Then, as if sensing her presence, Andrew paused, his hands still on the tools. He slowly raised his head, his deep blue eyes, once filled with a profound sorrow, now holding a glimmer of surprise, then incredulity, and finally an overwhelming, dizzying hope. "Evelyn," he breathed, his voice a low, rough murmur, disbelieving. The chisel clattered forgotten to the ground. He took a hesitant step, then another, until he stood before her, his hands reaching out, not quite touching. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down Evelyn's face, tracing paths through the dust of her journey. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "I am so sorry for everything." No, he murmured, his hands finally finding her cheeks, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. His touch was electric, a balm to her weary soul. "My darling Evelyn, there is nothing for you to be sorry for, only for me to regret that I ever doubted you." His eyes, filled with an intensity that spoke volumes of his suffering and his renewed hope, searched hers. "I received a letter. It broke my heart. I truly believed you had chosen your family, your life in Newport." "It was Charlotte," Evelyn confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush, a bitter truth finally unveiled. "She forged it. Lady Agatha, she helped me understand." Andrew's gaze hardened for a fleeting moment at the mention of Charlotte, then softened as he looked back at Evelyn, his expression overflowing with tenderness. "My clever, brave Evelyn, you came." It was not a question, but a statement of profound wonder. And then, with a raw, guttural sound that spoke of weeks of pain and longing, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him. Her head rested against his broad chest, and she could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that finally aligned with her own. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated release, a deluge of relief and joy. Apologies were whispered into her hair, confessions of enduring love poured forth, and promises of a shared future, of freedom, of a life built on truth and passion, were exchanged beneath the Italian sky. The air, once thick with tension, now hummed with the vibrant energy of two souls, finally reunited, finally free. Days stretched into weeks, then into months, each one weaving a richer tapestry of life Evelyn had only ever dared to dream. The villa, once a quiet refuge for Andrew, became a home filled with a gentle, vibrant energy. Evelyn, no longer confined by the strictures of Newport society, bloomed under the Tuscan sun. She abandoned her quiet sketches, not in favor of idle leisure, but to embrace her passion with a newfound ferocity. The rolling hills, the ancient ruins, the bustling local markets, the faces of the Italian people, all became subjects for her canvases. Her art, once a private solace, now exploded with color and confidence, each stroke reflecting the deep joy and freedom she had found. Andrew, observing her transformation, would often find her lost in concentration, her hazel eyes sparkling with an intensity he deeply admired. Their connection deepened, evolving beyond the initial spark of forbidden attraction into a profound partnership of souls. They spoke for hours, their conversations ranging from art and philosophy to the simple joys of their day. They discovered a shared love for exploring the hidden corners of the Italian countryside, riding on horseback through fields of wildflowers, or picnicking by tranquil streams. Andrew continued his sculpting, his hands now free to create without the burden of expectation. His statues, once forms of quiet strength, began to radiate a newfound serenity and joy, often featuring subtle nods to Evelyn's presence in his life. A flowing drape that mimicked her dress, an expressive hand holding a paintbrush. One late afternoon, as Evelyn sat by a sun-drenched window, painting a vibrant landscape, a letter arrived, bearing the familiar seal of the Greer family. Her hand trembled as she broke the wax, a shadow passing over her face. Andrew, noticing her sudden stillness, crossed the room to her side. The letter was from her father, Mr. Henry Greer, a stern, formal missive. It reiterated his profound disappointment and public disownment, emphasizing the lasting stain on the family name Evelyn had caused. He expressed a cold finality, stating that her actions had rendered her unworthy of their recognition. Evelyn felt a familiar ache, but it was dulled by the profound peace she now carried within her. She had chosen her path, and its rewards far outweighed the loss of her father's approval. But nestled within the folds of her father's harsh decree was another, smaller envelope, addressed in a hesitant, almost fragile script. It was from her mother. Evelyn opened it with bated breath, her heart a fragile bird. The words were simple, handwritten, and filled with a raw honesty her mother had rarely permitted herself. It spoke of deep regret, not for Evelyn's actions, but for her own failure to see her daughter's strength, her unique spirit. Perhaps, her mother had written, I was too blind, too caught in the webs of society to see the true value in what you possessed. You have shown a courage I never knew I possessed myself. Forgive me, my dear Evelyn, for not understanding sooner. My heart aches for you, even as it recognizes your triumph. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, not of sorrow, but of a complex blend of understanding and tender forgiveness. Her mother, too, was a prisoner of her world, but she had dared to send a secret whisper of love and acceptance across the vast distance. It was a small but profound victory, a tiny crack in the formidable wall of expectations that had once defined her life. Andrew gently squeezed her hand, his silent support a testament to their shared understanding. News of Newport, though distant, occasionally found its way to them, through discreet channels, often through letters from Lady Agatha, whose wry observations and steadfast loyalty had proven invaluable. Charlotte, Lady Agatha reported, had indeed married. Not to a duke, but to a Mr. Alistair Thorne, a man of immense wealth, but rumoured to possess a soul as cold and calculating as his ledgers. Their union was grand, but devoid of warmth, a transaction of status and fortune. Lady Agatha's letters hinted at Charlotte's enduring bitterness, her carefully constructed perfection, now a fragile facade over a heart consumed by resentment. Evelyn felt a pang of sadness for her sister, for the happiness Charlotte had never found, forever chasing a reflection in a gilded mirror. Yet there was no regret, only a quiet understanding that each had chosen her own path. Newport society, true to form, continued to whisper about the scandalous Duke and the quiet Greer sister who had abandoned everything. Their names remained topics of gossip, a cautionary tale for aspiring debutantes, and a titillating story for those who secretly yearned for such rebellion. But in their sun-drenched villa, surrounded by the beauty of Tuscany, Evelyn and Andrew remained blissfully unaffected. The distant murmurs of a world they had left behind held no power over their newfound peace. One glorious afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun painted the hills in hues of amber and rose, Evelyn sat on a stone bench in their courtyard. Her sketchbook, now filled with confident lines and vibrant watercolours, lay open on her lap. Her gaze was fixed on Andrew, who stood before his latest masterpiece. A marble statue of a man, his face serene, his eyes gazing toward a hopeful horizon, one hand outstretched, not in command, but in an invitation. It was Andrew as she knew him, true, free, and deeply loved. With a soft smile, Evelyn began to sketch the lines of his creation, capturing the essence of his artistry, the depth of his spirit. When she finished, she closed her book and walked over to him. He turned, his blue eyes meeting hers, full of a love so profound it needed no words. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a perfect, seamless fit. Together, they walked towards the villa, its warm light spilling into the deepening twilight. The path ahead was uncertain, as all lives are, but for Evelyn and Andrew there was no fear, only the quiet, triumphant certainty of their love, ready to face whatever joys or challenges the future might hold, hand in hand, heart to heart. And so we conclude the sweeping saga of Evelyn and Andrew, a love story painted not with the fleeting colours of societal approval, but with the enduring hues of courage, defiance, and a love so profound it shattered the very foundations of the Gilded Age. Their journey reminds us that true happiness is seldom found on the well-trodden paths of expectation, but often lies waiting in the uncharted territories of the heart. Evelyn, once a quiet shadow, dared to step into the blinding light of her own truth, transforming from a reluctant daughter into a celebrated artist, finding her voice and her destiny in the sun-kissed hills of Tuscany. Andrew, a duke burdened by a title he never truly desired, found his greatest freedom not in power or prestige, but in the quiet act of creation and the fierce devotion to the woman who saw past his station to his very soul. Their romance, born amidst whispers and intrigue, blossomed into an epic testament to the power of choice, proving that love, in its purest form, demands authenticity above all else. What did you feel as you followed Evelyn and Andrew across the ocean, from the rigid ballrooms of Newport to the liberated landscapes of Italy? Did their courage stir something within your own heart, a longing for a love that dares to defy? Tell us in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts and emotions evoked by these tales. And if you've journeyed with us to the very end of this passionate narrative, leave the word Tuscany in your comment. It's our special signal to know who truly embraced every twist and turn of their extraordinary love. If this story, and others like it, have touched your heart, and you wish to help us continue crafting these dramatic and emotional romances, please consider offering a super thanks on YouTube. Every contribution, no matter how small, helps our dedicated team bring more captivating sagas to life. And if a super thanks isn't possible, simply sharing this story with someone you believe will love it is a wonderful and powerful way to support us. Don't let the romance end here. We have many more breathtaking narratives waiting for you. Be sure to check out our other captivating tales linked in the cards above. Thank you for being a part of this unforgettable journey. Until our next grand adventure, may your heart always be your guide.